Okay, so here's a little video about making isolations in Photoshop. And really, learning this stuff on video is probably the easiest way to do it. Even when I do it in class, I get more questions than just about anywhere else. So I've got Photoshop all loaded up. Next up, I'm going to pull up Chrome. And let's go ahead and just find some image in the Google image search. So let's say I do like a skateboarder, for example. Just give me some interesting edges to work with. I'll click here on Images. And then when I'm taking a look here, some of the images that I find will be awfully small. So I also want to go to Search Tools and then restrict my size to large and above. And now you can see when I'm rolling over these preview images, down here I'll get this little indication of how many pixels make up each image. So you'll note, for example, here, this image is 3,000 pixels across, but the skater inside is actually a small proportion of that. So I want to make sure I'm finding a large object. For example, let's do this guy. So it's 2,000 across. Maybe he represents, I don't know, like 1,000 or 900 across. That shouldn't be too bad. But the other thing I need to make sure of is that I click all the way through, both here and then also here on View Image, until I just have the image isolated by itself. If I don't do that, I might accidentally be downloading a little preview version of this, which isn't going to be high quality at all. So I'll right click, and if you're using a mouse with only one button, you can hold down the Control button, but I've got a 2-button mouse, so I'll right click and save image as. Let's just call this skater.jpg, and I'll make a new folder here on my desktop called Isolations. You want to make sure to keep track of all this stuff. Okay, away with Chrome, back to Photoshop, and now I'll go to File, Open, navigate to my blah 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 desktop here, and bring up our skater. Okay, so as I'm navigating this image, you can see the tool is already selected, but it's this little Sherlock Holmes magnifying glass. I can find that right here in the toolbar, or I can hit Z. And now if I left click a few times, it'll get me in here nice and close. I can also hold down the space bar, and that'll give me the so-called pan hand, which lets me scoot this image around. Okay, next up I will hit P, and that's P for pen. That's found right over here in the menu. And you'll see there's a bunch of different flavors, but we just want the straight-up pen tool with no other fancy bells and whistles. Definitely do not pick freeform, and I'll talk more about that later, because we want to learn this the hard but also most effective way. Okay, so what the pen tool does is to lay down Bezier curves, and Bezier curves are so-called resolution independent. They're basically edges of shapes that are defined by mathematical equations, and they're really great because they're not subject to the restrictions of resolution until the moment of output. Now, of course, an image that's made up of a grid of pixels, like one that you capture with a digital camera, is limited by resolution. So we'll be using the Bezier paths to identify an area of the image to modify and another area of the image to leave behind. In this case, we're just going to basically cut this guy out, although in the future we can identify areas for changing the lightness and darkness or the color and all sorts of other effects. So to do this, I will have my pen clicked, as I said, and I'll look up here in the contextually sensitive menu. I want to make sure that I have path as opposed to shape clicked, so you'll pick path. And I'm just going to leave all the rest of these alone. You might also want to check and make sure that you have combined shapes selected, and more on that later. Okay, so when you're starting out with making Bezier curves, the easiest way to do this is probably just to make single clicks. There's two kinds of ways to lay down what are known as anchor points with the pen tool, and the first one is these single clicks. So basically I'll click every time the edge that I'm selecting changes direction. So I go up to the top of this little hill, down to the bottom, up to the top, and in some cases I can actually make pretty big leaps with big smooth curves, and I'll show you why. So let's just start with the head and the neck and then come back in and refine this. So each place that I've clicked is an anchor point, and because I've made single clicks, they're also known as corner points. So the only piece of information held by a corner point is the location. That's it. And that's why the segments that attach every one of those pairs of corner points is straight, because there's no additional curve information. Now to add that after the fact, I can expand the pen's menu and go to Convert Point Tool. And you can remember the name of that. Just think about how there are two kinds of points, right? So if I have corners, I want to convert them to curves. and I can also convert curves back to corners. And tell you what, I'm going to click Z, and we'll just get a little tighter here so you can really see what's going on. Back to the convert point tool. For whatever reason, there doesn't appear to be a hotkey for this one. Okay, now if I want to take something that was formerly angular and make it curvy, you'll see that this looks like a white arrow until I hover over a spot where it can have an effect. So I'll hover over this anchor point, hold down the mouse, and then stretch the mouse out like that. And what that gives me in addition to the anchor is known as a tangency handle. So when I move from a corner point to a curve point, I go from 1 to 3 pieces of information. So first of all, I've got the location of the anchor there in the middle. I've also got the length of the tangency handle, which suggests basically the magnitude, so how strong the curve will be. And I've also got the angle of the handle relative to that center point. So if I were to move this back and forth with the white arrow, you can see here I can modify that angle, although it maintains that 180-degree relationship. I can also change the magnitude, but note how it allows me to change the magnitude on one side of that anchor point. So we can take the convert point tool and walk through here and make these areas curvy, but we'll notice pretty soon that we just do not have enough anchor points to do a great job identifying all the curves on the side of Tony Hawk's face here. So let's grab this one and stretch it out. You can see I can get pretty close, but then as I work, sometimes I'm just not going to be able to accomplish exactly the curve I want. See here, I can make the bottom part of the curve look great, but that's at the expense of the top part of the curve. So to solve that, we can make changes with the white arrow. We can also add and subtract points. Up here, for example, if I grab the white arrow, I can make this side of the tangent handle just a little less powerful, right, by changing its length, so the magnitude shrinks. I can change its angle a little bit there. And so you can see here that curve is starting to look really nice against the top of this helmet. Here I'm probably going to need one additional point, but let's see if I can pull it off. Oh, that's not too bad. I think on the nose I'm definitely going to need some more help. So for that I'll hit P for pen. The path is already active, it's visible. And now as I hover over an area of the path that does not yet have a point on it, you see I get a little plus sign. So I'll drop a point right there. It automatically grows a tangency handle that makes sure that it creates no changes in the shape. And then here I'll hold down the command key and I can move that anchor point around with the white arrow a little bit. So we're starting to adopt that edge really nice. Here you can see I'll need quite a few more points to grab that eye. So first let's maybe change this location a little bit, change this magnitude, and then I might come in here and add a point, stretch it out to there. You'll notice using the convert point tool to move back from a curve point to a corner point, and so forth. Let's go ahead and try this with the lips real quick. Add a point, white arrow to move it, add another point, white arrow to move it. Over here it's pretty hard to make these curvy because they're so small, so that's more of like a stair-stepped area. Add a point, and then we'll get the bottom of his safety equipment strap. Add a point, and so forth. Here I might use the convert point tool to accomplish that little dip. Use the white arrow to reposition that element, and so forth. Okay, so there's no doubt that the pen tool takes quite a bit of a learning curve, and it just requires practice, practice, and practice. So the way that I recommend starting is to grab an image. Again, it should be made up of quite a few pixels, at least say 2,000 on the side. You bring it here into Photoshop. You select the pen tool. Start off by making a general sort of selection around your object with single clicks, and then come back and edit those with the convert point tool and the white arrow.